What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me are my two great co-hosts, Fede Perez and Ralph Hannah. And guys, wait a minute, we're all in our Paraguay shirts. The qualifiers are over, but what does that mean? This is the first Guarani Vision episode where we are World Cup players again. God, I messed that up. Whatever. We are back at the World Cup. After 16 long years, Paraguay have qualified for the World Cup. Let's celebrate. We are so happy. After 16 long years since that wonderful tournament in South Africa in 2010, Paraguay have officially qualified for their first World Cup, their ninth overall World Cup. And obviously, all of us are so happy here at Guarani Vision. It's been an incredible, 5 years doing this. Obviously, Fede's brainchild. We've had Ralph on, me, obviously, Maria. We send our shout outs to her, obviously, if she's listening, obviously Paraguayan. I'm sure she is as happy as all three of us are. We are back at the World Cup. We are mundialistas, as we say. I was trying to think of a good word in English, but I couldn't. But anyway, we are mundialistas for the first time. This is our first episode doing it ever since Paraguay are back at the World Cup. And man, it feels great. Man, it feels great. I feel like all of us here can really feel as if, though, a weight is lifted out of our shoulders because, we love the sport so much and we have dealt with the ups and the downs as fans. Obviously, we all have our story. We've even from episode 1 when we remember why we became Paraguay fans. I still remember, we all each had that story. We all had that dream of going back to a World Cup, and here we are. We have officially made it after 16 years. Man, I mean, we got a lot to talk about. We got to obviously talk about the whole qualifiers, as a whole. Obviously, these two games against Ecuador where they secured their qualification, the last game against Peru over there in Lima, what we've enjoyed, what we didn't enjoy. But man, I'm happy. I feel like all of us have kind of been on a high since the last, literally 8 days since Paraguay officially secured qualification after that result against Ecuador. But we got to go straight to the guy who was there to witness history. He was thankful enough to take his time to be at the Defensores del Chaco and probably the biggest party that the country has been able to go through in the last 16 years. Fede Perez, man. I mean, come on. I said it jokingly pre-show. If you were still a bit hungover, not hungover in the alcoholic sense, but at least hungover on this high that Paraguay have been in, because I feel like everyone's sort of positivity and smile has not been left out ever since Thursday evening at around, I'm trying to remember, it's like 10:30 p.m. Paraguay local Paraguay time when they did officially qualify for the World Cup. I mean, I gotta go straight to you, man. How are you feeling? Let's just go with that. How are you feeling after a 16-year odyssey finally ends and you're on to the World Cup?
I feel better than ever, man. I feel younger than ever. More than ready for probably our happiest, most proud moment on our 5 years recording this podcast. Yeah, guys, it was this week. We recently achieved our 5th anniversary. So happy anniversary to you guys also. They correctly called it, I remember at the beginning of this journey, with the Albirroja, the rebirth. I don't know if you guys remember that. El Renacer was the big slogan of this whole thing. Yeah, and I was remembering, that DiCaprio movie when he comes back from being dead, he picks himself up there, and that was us right here, in the qualifiers. That was the Albirroja doing it once again. We are back. That lion that you guys saw back in South Africa kind of woke up. That long nap is over. That 15-year long nap, and the world has been really talking about us. They've been talking about Paraguay this week because it's the national team finally qualified. World Cup number 9 is coming up next for Paraguay, so it feels amazing. The other day when I lived against Ecuador, or just that unique night, a cherished night in my memory, really, not just being in Defensores del Chaco, the aftermath, the whole celebration would turn into a crazy wild night here, a holiday afterwards. Paraguayans really know how to celebrate it, and they showed it that night. The country, I think, kind of fell in love with football again this past year. I feel that fans are in love again with their national team, the Albirroja, and thanks to Coach Gustavo Alfaro and his staff, the way they brought back that spark, it's been amazing to see it happen so fast. The turning point really in this whole journey was him, being strong also at home, winning the games at the Defensores de Chaco, and never losing there. It was really a full circle moment, guys, for a lot of Paraguayans. I must imagine you guys also, Roberto, Ralph. I seen it. These 5 years that we've been doing this. I know Ralph lived it really close that last Copa America where we were on that downhill, and now we picked ourselves up. I know Roberto was very young back probably in 2010, and now I see him always representing Paraguay and ESPN and doing his thing as a journalist, and now he's gonna have the opportunity to have Paraguay in his home country there in the U.S. So it's got to be really special for you guys, also for everyone that loves Paraguayan football. It really is amazing. That's what we here in Guarani Vision are all about. Also about this national team. So it really feels amazing, Roberto. But before we kick it off, I got to do the first question already in this night. It's probably gonna be the hardest and most important question. It is the first time, I think, in a long time we are actually recording on a night, and it is Friday night. And just like you said, we still kind of hanging over here in Paraguay. So the big question is, what are we gonna celebrate with? Are we gonna go straight with the drinks? We're gonna wait until the end of the show because I'm celebrating, man. I'm still on hype. We're still doing it here.
It really is a sort of a Friday night. I did have a few drinks beforehand, but I am just doing a little bit of H2O, at least for me, just for now, keeping it chill. We got to save it up for, obviously what's going to be a big summer for us and obviously winter over there. But Ralph, again, I feel like this is something that has been quite, something that even for us, we feel so happy about it too. But I think a lot of South America and probably the rest of the world have seen it. I remember when I woke up, on Friday morning, after I was up until like I think 2 in the morning just watching the coverage of everything going on in Paraguay. And then I woke up and I was like on social media, and all the big major guys were talking about it. ESPN, BBC, Sky Sports. They were all showing the videos and the celebrations of what was going on in Asunción and Calle Palma. And of course, because compared to 2010, the world is much more globalized. Obviously, in 2010, Twitter was still very small. Facebook was still a big thing, but it wasn't as big. And social media in general hasn't been as big as ever before. Like there was no Instagram, there was no TikTok, there was none of that. And now at the blink of an eye, you can get all sort of reactions from everywhere going on in the world. And of course, doing a podcast about Paraguayan football as a whole, I can remember, I can, tell, Ralph, for those that maybe don't know about you, like you've been to World Cups, you've seen Paraguay play them as well. I mean, it's a special moment. And I think, once we get to obviously, it'd be nice to, talk about that story, eventually about what it was like living in a World Cup and experience it. I think it's certainly something for a generation of fans. Fede put it up, good point. I was 12 the last time Paraguay qualified, played at the World Cup, and now I'm 27. I'm about to be 28. But there's a lot of kids out there, especially those even on this Paraguay team who were very young the last time Paraguay played. Maybe we're just starting off their careers, we're in youth academies, or we're just little kids. A lot of these guys are going to experience their first ever World Cup. I think even not just for the fans that get the chance to do it, the ones that are younger and obviously don't have the big memory of 2010. A lot of these guys, a lot of these players will experience it as well. So it feels like sort of full circle for a lot of these guys. And yeah, obviously here in the United States, it's going to be big for the Paraguayan diaspora, who obviously are a small but very strong minority that will be repping the flag and hoping that Paraguay can have a really good showing in North America next summer.
Oh yeah, that's right. I mean, firstly, to the point about being at World Cups before, I don't know if everybody is ready. Thinking about the journalists, the people that were doing the Copa America last year that I covered, if they're really ready for the World Cup, it's going to be totally different. I mean, it's going to be huge. One organizer, I have been speaking to some organizers, one that's involved in catering and stuff, that said, yeah, we heard it's going to be like a Super Bowl every day for a month. And it's like, yeah, get ready. This is going to be big. And the same in Paraguay. I mean, what we saw, we talked a little bit about it on the show before about, the sponsors coming in, the commercial aspect, but just the outpouring of people onto the streets, even before the game. It was a strange evening because Paraguay kind of knew they were qualified already. It was going to be a crazy combination of results that wouldn't take them through. And so even when the bus comes down, the bus always goes through from Upané, goes through Mercado Cuatro, which is, the very one of the most populous areas of Asunción. And there's always lots of people on the street, you know, even in bad times, you see people out there. But this was crazy. I mean, I was honestly unsure how the bus would make it on time. And there were people like jumping in to try and get photos and videos, and they were going to get run over. And all they were taking a photo was of the team photographer and the driver because you couldn't even see the players. But that was like the hype that people had before the game. And then afterwards, we saw the celebrations. I think what got picked up in the news a lot as well is, of course, the president had promised a day off. He said Friday's a day off if Paraguay qualify, which is a very great, you know, very clever political move because nobody was going to work the next day, whether it was a day off or not. But of course, that just made the celebrations even better. Nobody had that kind of worry or guilt that, oh, I'm not going to make it up tomorrow for school or for work. You know, that was gone, and people flooded into the Panteón de Héroes, which was built for war heroes, but it's recently become basically a place to celebrate national football heroes, you know, and it was where people went in 2010. And I'm sure you picked up on it, Roberto. I'm sure a lot of people had that fear of missing out, the FOMO, that they might never see this, they might never experience this World Cup that they'd heard about as kids, or maybe they'd seen their older cousins, their older relatives being able to go out and celebrate, and they hadn't been able to do that, right? And now was finally the time. And for the players specifically, you mentioned you're almost 30, but what about Gustavo Gomez, Angel Romero, Miguel Almiron, Junior Alonso? They're all over 30 now, and they're going for the first time. Even Gatito Fernandez, he didn't make it in 2010. So they're all getting this first shot at going to a World Cup after so much time. And remember how close they've been with that generation of 2010, because that's when they were all coming up through the youth teams. They would have done sparrings and that kind of thing. Some of them will have played with Nelson Aido Valdez when he came back, with Roque, with Taquara. So all these great kind of heroes of 2010 that these players have played with, but they've never experienced it themselves until now. So I think it's just such an exciting moment, and it's funny, like everybody's now like just waiting for December because we want to know like where are we gonna play, where do we get to go, who are we playing against, and there's all of that to come. By the way, for people listening, there's so much to come before that with the national teams. We've got 3 World Cups. We've got the under 17s, men's and women's, and we got the under 20s. So, I mean, there's so much coming up between now and December. It's a really exciting time for Paraguayan football.
Really has been a good year, of course, for Paraguayan football as a whole. You know, in the last over a year now, obviously, Preolímpico, going to the Olympic Games, the men's and women's teams doing well at U17 and U20 level, qualifying for World Cups, obviously, and now the major one. Gotta hope for the women's, you know, gotta see what happens in 27 in Brazil. But yeah, you know, I feel like for Fede, you know, for both of us, for all of us really, it's a special moment. I think it hasn't hit us as of yet, just because you know it happened so fast. You know, we're talking literally on the first year that Alfaro took charge. If you think about it, the first game against Uruguay away, and then obviously winning against Brazil. I still remember the video, the famous video of Alfaro shouting to, I think it was Enciso actually, and to the other guys, he's saying, "Vamos, vamos, vamos, vamos al mundial." Like, you know, the fact that hey, we're gonna go to the World Cup, and that was the second game. In Paraguay, we're not even close to qualifying as of yet. And here we are now. He's kind of been a word of his say. I mean, you know, obviously we have to really feel very happy about it. And you know, Fede, I think I'll go to you on this one because you know, really assessing all of this together. I mean, it's huge. You know, I think you know the big picture of this achievement. It's been long. You know, you think about it, the last 3 qualifiers. You know, 2014, Paraguay were coming off a quarterfinal run, and then they were finalists in 2011 in the Copa America. You know, you would think that that kind of helped a generation that, hey, we can go to the World Cup in Brazil. We're obviously automatic host, so that means there was one less team to go, and it was obviously at the time 4.5 spots. But you think Paraguay would go through? They got eliminated early, finished dead last. 2018 came about. Very inconsistent, you know. Started with the year with Ramon Diaz and then came in with Chiqui Arce. And then on the final day, Venezuela, who, you know, had a few things go on with them emotionally. They were the ones that took them out of contention. for that spot when all they needed was a win. And then 22 with Qatar, obviously a really weird situation too under Berizzo, under Gustavo Alfaro Esqueloto, in COVID, if you remember as well, and they were eliminated early. So it has been a while. It has been a while, and there have been players on this team I don't know the big list of all the players. If we go back to, and I actually have a really good memory of this, is how crazy it is. The first game against Peru back in 2011, and then of course the game against Ecuador in 2025. 14 years really waiting for something. I mean, wonder why it did take so long, Fede. I mean, I'll ask you that. I wonder what was something that happened and it took so long, because for a country of Paraguay, like you said, now they're going to their 9th World Cup. Not a lot of South American countries have that sort of history in comparison to obviously the big three of Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, who obviously have been to the World Cups and won it, of course. But yeah, this has always been sort of the tradition. You think going to 4 straight, it kind of felt like it was a birthright, and then they went on to miss 3 straight, and on the 4th attempt, maybe 4 is the magic number after all, they make it. So yeah, it's been a long journey. It really has been, for all of us, really. Some people maybe have kind of been sort of getting sort of that heart back to Paraguay in these qualifiers, and been, I don't want to say jump on the bandwagon, but maybe has been for some people. But you got to remember, like me, Ralph, of course, this, and obviously you, Fede, we've been through a lot. We've been through a lot in the last 14 years following this team, with a lot of lows in comparison before getting all the highs in the last year.
Yeah, no doubt about it, right? I mean, we really went as low as you can get, and as low as you can go, and I think the turning point was definitely picking the right guy. It was definitely going with Gustavo Alfaro, no matter how much it costs, no matter who you had to go through. Let's not forget Costa Rica; they had him. So I think that was the turning point, because before him, we didn't have that type of coach. I mean, I didn't see that with Chiqui Arce. I didn't see that with Garnero. I didn't see that with Berizzo. I didn't see that with Sachelotto. I didn't even felt it completely with Ramon Diaz, which is one of the probably the best coaches that we've had in the last couple of years, right? That mentality, that pressure totally off the players, and him just taking over the whole situation. I mean, from the first day, the way that he did it, the communication, the putting the fans by his side, convincing everybody, working player by player, and just getting into their heads, and we can mention all the coaches that went through, right? Because there were so many, and they really tried it all. They tried playing with different styles. They tried bringing Argentinian born players that had some sort of relationship with our country, with Paraguay, and see if they could take it to the next level. But it didn't happen. And you saw, especially in the last coach that we had, he brought in a lot of players that he thought he knew very well. He thought that they were going to be the base of the team and that he was going to be able to move around them. And that clearly didn't happen. So it was also about picking the right players. If you look at the list of players that were used in this last combo, the one that we were able to qualify, and you look at the list of players that was used in that first call-up that Alfaro made when we played against Uruguay in that 0-0 draw, it's pretty much the same squad, guys. I mean, there's just 3-4 new names, maybe a couple of injured players that couldn't make it, but the rest, it's been using the same players, and I think that's been key, also from Alfaro, just making the right decisions. I didn't think we were going to find an Alfaro out there, to be honest with you guys, a year back. And we found him. And just as I was there the other day, they were announcing the team. I think Roberto kind of went through this the last game around at home also. They were announcing player by player. And the name that got the crowd going was Gustavo Alfaro. He's the one that got everybody got up, and he got the standing ovation. This team is not about a star. Obviously, Julian Cesar wasn't there. Obviously, you can give props to a lot of players because they contributed so much. And we're going to talk definitely about the players that stood out in this team. But for me, this wasn't going to happen without Gustavo Alfaro. So for me, the turning point was picking the right coach. I think that's when everything kind of changed for me, Roberto. I wanted to look at it from the positive side. I don't want to cry over the past. I don't want to point fingers at people. I know Robert Harrison had a lot of weight on his shoulders, and thankfully he kind of took that away from him. Also, Justo Villar, who was the manager of this national team lately, and he was also, head to head there with the last coaches, working side by side, and the pressure was on them, I think, in this qualifiers, in this journey with Gustavo Alfaro, who really took the weight on his shoulder and had no issue whatsoever carrying this team from the first day.
So Alfaro is he's such an important part for this final, what was it, like 9 games in the end, where he took over in this final year. And one thing that matched up with him taking over, and it's kind of surprising because Paraguay, because he's not seen as an attacking coach, but Paraguay was having that difficulty in scoring goals, and particularly away from home. And so the interesting thing with Alfaro is he came in with his defensive mindset. In fact, if you remember, the first game was a 0-0. But what he managed to do was start to get Paraguay to score goals, especially away. They scored twice in Colombia, twice in Bolivia. But even at home, when they were going behind and they were coming back and winning, so they also scored 2 against Venezuela, 2 against Chile, 2 against Argentina. So he was actually trying to find a way to get them to score goals. And one key part of that was Julio Enciso. Enciso scores 2 of those goals are great goals that he scores those away games, but also just he managed to find the way to use him, not lose his defensive stability, and still have Enciso being creative and being a difference maker. And so I thought that was really interesting, not just Alfaro coming in, but he kind of solved an Enciso problem. We'll never know if Garnero could have done that, but because Garnero didn't actually have Enciso in World Cup qualifiers because of the injury, but he did have him at the Copa America. And what we saw with in the Copa America was he couldn't maintain defensive stability with Enciso. He could have Enciso in the team doing what he does, but he couldn't keep his team to as solid and strong. And so that was maybe the key of somebody like Alfaro that has this. He does have this defensive mindset, but from the way he does the press conferences, the way he loves to talk to people, he has a bit of that genius in him, right? That kind of streak. So I think he can connect with an Enciso and use him to Paraguay's advantage. I think that kind of relationship has been so key because if you look back at some of the teams, going right back 2018, 2014, 18, 22 qualifiers, we've had a good set of players. I don't think we've had a kind of poor generation of players. In fact, many of them are coming now to the World Cup, like we mentioned before, like the Gomez, Almiron, etc. But we never had a player like Enciso, right? We've never had that talent, that mercurial talent that he has. And so I think it was really so necessary that if we're going to the World Cup, he has to be part of it, but you have to manage him because of the person, not just the personality, but the playing style he has is not going to fit very well. And so I think Alfaro, not just getting the whole team, but picking that, that one player that was going to be so important and being able to use him and integrate him was also such a key part for this and getting us back to the World Cup.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think we'll assess it as a whole. Just everything kind of fixed itself, the fact that, looking and put in the chat for both of us, and we'll talk about it in a bit, just, looking in comparison to the past qualifiers, I think you see obviously a huge consistent sort of, uptick in performance in the way that they do. Like you said, they are getting goals, they scored 13 overall in the Alfaro era, conceded 7, which shows that Paraguay clearly keep with their roots, but they aren't afraid to take the initiative, scoring a lot at home, winning a lot at home. If you remember, of course, that has always been sort of the bad thing about, because you're not going to go, because really, if you're going to go to the World Cup, you have to win all your games or at least go unbeaten. That's what Alfaro did. Alfaro kept, and even overall, we only lost 1 game at home. That was Colombia, but that was in the Garnero era. Alfaro kept that defense, and kept that sort of mentality of that, how the Defensor del Chaco has to be a caldron, has to be, a hot place that, like, hey, any team that goes there, doesn't matter if you're Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Venezuela, any of those teams, like you're not going to get points there. Ecuador did, of course, but hey, that's a different story. But still, that I think that's sort of the mentality that has to be given. And there's been a lot of factors that I'm sure we'll assess, once sort of this whole process sort of ends, if it ends in a high or a low. But you have to really look at how this sort of mentality has kind of shifted. And Ralph, I remember going back to some of the games where Paraguay would concede a goal and they would feel like, oh, they've given up, and they haven't this time, and they have conceded goals in a lot of these games, and they took the initiative to come back. Even in difficult circumstances, be it down 2-0 in Colombia, in altitude in Bolivia against world champions Argentina, against teams that didn't make it to the World Cup like Venezuela. We can go on, and I think that's sort of something that we have to really understand and put it all in perspective, that this team does not give up, even in the circumstance. And I'm sure when we talk about the World Cup, for a lot of these teams that, maybe have are seeing the record or seeing the performances and seeing who they win, whoever the three rivals that Paraguay gets, I'm sure they're going to look at them. It's like, well, wait a minute, this is a team that clearly are not going to make things difficult. It doesn't matter if you're France, the vice champion of the second place winner to second place of the last World Cup, or I don't know, in Uzbekistan, they're going to their first ever World Cup. I think that's something that, and of course, we have to feel the same way for them too. We got to always understand, but at least they have to understand that the respect is back. And I think that's the big thing in this, Fed. To close it out, really, I'll go on to you. But Paraguay have their respect back. The fact that they're back in, they're not the like you said, that they are the sleeping giant that woke up, but they're no longer the punching bag for a lot of the continent, where they look at Paraguay and they think, oh yeah, but it's not the Paraguay of the past, that made things difficult, the Paraguay of the 2000s and all that era. No, this is now the Paraguay of this era, the Paraguay of the Alfaro, the one that's like, we're going back like the 98 team, like the 02, 06, 10, all that kind of things. We got our identity back. And that's what Alfaro said at the beginning, even in his first press conference, that Paraguay needs to recover that sort of identity, and what made Paraguay so formidable in all of South America for the 12 years that they went to, well, the 4 straight World Cups that they went to in 2010.
Paraguay has the best record in South America against Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. Those are the biggest countries that usually go to the World Cup, and we are the ones that usually get the best results out of them. And that's what happened in this qualifiers again. So for me, yeah, it felt like we're back, and we're back on track. We're back against the big teams, especially we did it at home. I mean, for me specifically, it was that game against Brazil. That's the game I actually started feeling like, okay, we're not just back to the World Cup. We can actually play against these kind of teams. And you feel that potential has always been there, but now the players are feeling like it's a reality. So you have a couple of months to get ready. You're going to feel totally different. I mean, for players, it's going to be a whole new sensation. As of right now, they're still celebrating, obviously going through the whole thing, but eventually they're going to start feeling that World Cup sensation and that opportunity to compete again, and that's going to be huge for most of these guys, because they're gonna have to take it to the next level, and we've seen that they've been capable of it, and that's what I've loved, that this team not only made it, but they evolved into a better team, and they did it together with everyone chipping in. I mean, you can't just pick two players out of the whole list. I mean, you're gonna look into the games and you're gonna see that everybody contributed for this qualifying.
Yeah, I was about to say, Ralph. I mean, I go back to the game against Uruguay. No draw. Okay, respectable. Then they beat Brazil. Okay, yeah, that felt right. Then against Argentina, the world champions, the reigning Copa America, two back-to-back Copa America champions, arguably the best team in the world. They get the win coming back. You're like, okay, that's when things put. That was for me. That was like sort of the thing. Even the Bolivia game where they came back, I think that also kind of helped reinforce it. And of course, the comeback in Colombia, which I think was insane and kind of secured that idea of like, okay, we're going to go back to the World Cup. But I think the Argentina game going back, I don't know if it's the same for you, as sometimes we can be a bit pessimistic when following this team, as that nothing is surely done until it's done, as it happened last week in the qualifiers. But I'm sure it was going in the back of your mind where you're thinking, okay, wait a minute, this Paraguay team under Alfaro has something, and they're not going to be sort of a a one-off, is if what I'm saying is true.
Yeah, it was slowly building up over as the results started happening, right? You started to believe more and more because I think with the Brazil game, the maybe doubt was it was a very poor Brazil team historically. The goal was an amazing goal by Diego Gomez, and it was like, can you even repeat that? And then Sanabria in the next home game scores the Chilena, and you're like, okay, we can repeat this. And I think you started to also look at the team, and there was this idea that the team maybe wasn't good enough. I think we talked about it here even before, where we said, there's not that many players in the Champions League. There's not as many players maybe in the top five leagues. But you started to look at the quality and say, well, actually, there is quality here. And it's interesting that when the Club World Cup came along recently, everyone talked about, the Brazilian teams are actually much stronger than people thought. And suddenly it's like, well, hey, we got Gustavo Gomez in Brazil, Alonso's back in Brazil, Balbuena's there. We got Bobadillas, a young player starting to do really well in Brazil. Villasanti, who's not there, of course, because he's been injured. Now Ramon Sosa is back there. I mean, suddenly we're like, okay, actually, we do have a good team. And I think it was even the players themselves needed to believe that. And Fede, you were the one that picked up on it first when we hired Alfaro. You said, let's look at his psychologist that he used in Ecuador. And I think that's been such a key part too. I mean, the results built into it, but it was the whole psychology of saying, hey, you guys are actually a good team. You've got the capability to go and do this, and then they've proved it, and they've gone out there, beaten these teams, broken some records as well with the game in Peru, finally winning in Lima. So it's all come together at the perfect time.
Yeah, no, it certainly has. And let's go into that. Like you said, Ralph, we're getting into the two games. I guess the first one is probably the most boring of the two, which is crazy because it was the game that secured their qualification. It was the game against Ecuador, obviously an Ecuador team that have, at the time, the best defense in South America. I think they conceded what, five overall in the entire qualifiers, which, when you look about it as well, Paraguay also are a team that have had good defenses as well. I mean, we're finishing off where they conceded 10. That's the best Paraguay defensive record of all time in a qualifiers. If you look back, I'm looking here, the record, of course, was the 14 conceded in France 98, which obviously had Chiqui Arce, Carlos Gamarra, Celso Ayala, and now you have Alderete, Gustavo Gomez, Junior Alonso, Juan Cáceres. That defense has been sort of the one by memory, and it was a gritty game because really Ecuador didn't, again, there wasn't really much in sense of like danger because Paraguay really were going to go to the World Cup unless something crazy happened. Obviously the big stain, if you want to say, is that they broke their streak of a perfect record. So Paraguay have officially dropped points to Ecuador for the first time in Asunción, which means that every team in South America has at least gotten a point in the qualifiers in Paraguay. So hey, so much for a broken record, Alfaro. We'll get you out sacked now. No, but seriously, it was a really good special moment, Fede, for what really was a boring game. I mean, it was very gritty. You had some chances. I think Ramon Sosa, going back, I think really should have had his chance early on. I think he had a really golden chance, but effectively, it was a game that Paraguay didn't feel any danger, and I'm sure Ecuador felt the same way. They had already qualified as well, but I think from what we saw and going into sort of that lineup, we saw Ronaldo Martinez make his debut, a surprise choice overall. Him making his debut, his first ever Paraguay game in this decisive game. Obviously, no Enciso, so Alfaro had to switch a bit. And look at the lineup, it was Gatito, Cáceres back, Cáceres, Alete, Gustavo Gomez, and Alonso in that back four. Uh, the midfield of Almiron, Diego Gomez, Cubas, and Ramon Sosa, and then obviously the top two of Tony Sanabria and Ronaldo Martinez. So it's different than what Alfaro had been accustomed to, but he's not a victim of sticking with everything. He likes a gamble, as Ralph always said. He kind of likes his tinkering and likes to be pragmatic, even for a game that didn't really show much. Very low possession, 38% of the night, 7 shots, 3 on target, but it felt like a lukewarm game for something that it should have been a big party. I mean, it obviously was a big party, but maybe the game didn't reflect on that. But hey, who cares if you made it to the World Cup, I guess.
Yeah, we got the point that we needed, and definitely the show was in the stands, right? And the preview, the music, and the aftermath, like we talked before, the game was not pretty at all. It was a tense match, and I kind of felt it from that way. I thought that, the players didn't want to make a mistake, and a couple of players wanted to stand out. I thought one of the guys that really tried to do everything, especially in that first half, was Ramon Sosa. You kind of feeling for the kid, that he's trying to do a little bit too much, and he's trying to take over in certain games, but he's not making the difference, right? I mean, he's not being able to score. He's not taking that weight off his shoulders. He had the opportunity in both games and just couldn't show off. I did not like what I saw from him in the first half. I didn't feel comfortable also with Ronaldo. I didn't think he felt himself out there, with the team, connecting with his new teammates. I kind of felt that he was running all over the place and he just wasn't touching the ball that much. And in the second half, maybe he felt a bit more comfortable. They started looking for him a bit more, but I think it was probably that Andres Cubas shot, from outside the box, the big highlight of the game. That ball that hit the bar. And that was kind of late in the game, right? Late in the second half. So not much really happened in the sense of, okay, we're about to score. We have them against the ropes. No, we never felt that way. But you got to give it to the Ecuadorian team also, right? They really have a very young team. I think we're going to see a lot of these players in the next couple of World Cups, and especially that defense. I was really surprised with Pacho, with Hincapié. I mean, they're really hard to go through, especially Pacho. I mean, we're talking about a player that plays in PSG. We're talking about the other one that I think plays in Milan. So, these are European players right now. They have their stars. And then we saw what they did against Argentina, right? So they were clearly thinking about that second half. So I loved what I saw from Paraguay in the defense. I thought Gustavo Gomez really stood out again. Alderete did his thing. They understand each other so well, and I think that's great working towards the World Cup. To have that really good defense, solid as of right now with Alderete and our captain Gustavo Gomez. I don't know if I'm gonna stand out a player in this match. I think it was all about the result. It was all about getting the point that we needed. And even late in the match, you kind of felt like, okay, both teams are okay with the 0-0. We're just gonna take it. And I never felt like Ecuador really wanted to beat us, Ralph. That's the reality. I kind of felt like both teams were okay with the draw.
Yeah, it was a game where Ecuador dominated possession, which is kind of the style now under their new coach, and but they never seemed like you were saying, it was never like they were really trying to take the game to Paraguay. They were happy with controlling possession, but without risking too much. Paraguay, I think you mentioned it with Martinez. He didn't really fit. It was a totally different system with him, which isn't his fault. It's just the way they were set up. But so Paraguay didn't have as much control, and then he didn't have that defined kind of role that you could really see. Playing with Gomez and Cuas meant you're not going to have a huge amount of possession. You're not going to pack the midfield, and this is without Caicedo, right? Because Caicedo wasn't playing for Ecuador. So it just seemed like that kind of game where both teams were happy with how it was going. Ecuador felt safe in possession. Paraguay felt fine that they weren't conceding because that they knew they only needed a point to qualify. And it's really telling. I think it's from about 68 minutes is the last shot on goal. So you have like the last 20 minutes is just going through the motions almost. And I'll tell a quick funny anecdote. I didn't even watch the final parts of the game because I had to go pick up my daughter. And so I started listening in the radio to Chipi Chung, to ABC, and they're just building up, and all they're talking about is the crowd. They're not even talking about the game anymore because everything was like, what are the crowds going to do? What's going to happen? And Fede, you sent us that great video that people can go check out where you're giving it live reaction from the stands. And behind you is just like this crazy cloud of smoke because I don't know what they did with the fireworks, but the smoke was everywhere. So it was looking like a strange kind of moment, right? In that qualification that and everything was waiting for that moment. Like the game itself was almost kind of what's the word, like a formality to just to get through so we could get to the party. It's like having to go to the wedding before you get to the reception, right?
I was about to say, Fede, when that final whistle did hit, I mean, so explain to us, what was it like?
Well, first of all, I started looking around, right? And I saw a lot of my colleagues, a lot of journalists just in tears. And it was an image of just guys hugging each other, people going around and just saying, we finally did it. They finally made it. And then it was me just looking at the people, just looking at the stands, and it was beautiful to see the different generations, the young guys, the young kids in the stands, the teenagers with their parents, some grandparents that took their really young grandsons there, and to have that special moment, they're never gonna forget that night. And for me, it was also that, it was kind of just taking all of that in after 15 years, and to see the players in the pitch also bursting into tears, seeing Robert Harrison, the FA president, running in there and just hugging one by one. Gustavo Alfaro had his wife and his daughter come to the country just for this game. They've never been here before. It was the first time for them coming to Paraguay, and it was also it was really special for the players because a lot of them made a lot of their family members come, and a lot of them were there in the Defensores de Chaco. Like you guys said, the party was just getting ready, several nights before, and it was a magical night. I think a lot of people are gonna remember it probably forever. Uh, just seeing how close everyone got to be in this locker room, I think, is also magical because Alfaro took the pressure, and we have our captain, we have Gustavo Gomez, we have the players from the old generations, but we have the new ones also coming about, and I love to see that come together. We have players that barely speak Guarani, but they still manage themselves into this locker room, like Andres Cubas, like Sandes. They made their lives outside of Paraguay, but they still feel really close to this locker room. They feel part of this, and to see all of that come together, and to see the country finally have that moment of joy, it was something like I've never seen before, especially the aftermath, Roberto. I mean, leaving the stadium, it took me forever to get home. I didn't want to get home because I wanted to be part of the party. Unfortunately, I had to work the next day. I didn't have a holiday because that's the way journalists do things. But just to see everybody, the cars, it was a parade. People were jumping all over. They were jumping in front of the cars. They were just celebrating. Music was blasting everywhere. I mean, it was just a fantastic night like I've never seen here before. And I'm saying this like I've never seen anything like that. I didn't see it back in 2010. I haven't seen it in this last 15 years. Not just with football, in any aspect of the society, Paraguayan society. So that just shows you the power of football also, and what it means to Paraguayans.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit it right there on the nail, Fede. Football is really sort of the unifying sort of way of a country, Ralph, that goes through a lot. It goes through a lot. We don't want to get too political, but obviously, this is a country that obviously has gone through a lot in terms of, just social inequality and as a whole. And really, football is sort of the unifying factor that you have fans of Olimpia, Cerro, Libertad, Luqueño, Guarani, whatever. They're all together and they're all sort of in unison and to enjoy and to celebrate. The fact that the sort of public holiday, which again could be populist, whatever you want, but you can't deny that, because it happened is because football is such a big, important thing. And when it comes to qualify for a World Cup, which of course is sort of also the centerfold of not just how your country does in football, but also how you are on the world stage, because it's a tournament that everyone watches. Everyone enjoys the World Cup. Doesn't matter if you're a big football fan or not. People will know about your country just because, maybe different from the Olympic Games, of course, but this is something that, people that, they learn about Paraguay because of these big tournaments. They learn about these players. Doesn't matter if it was in 2010 or 98 or 86 or in 1930 in the first ever World Cup in Uruguay, or even now in 26, that's sort of like rediscovering and learning about Paraguay. It comes from those sort of events, and you see that from all that. It really it puts yourself in the upper echelons of world relevance, basically.
Yeah, for Paraguay specifically, they were one of the best 8 teams in the world, right, in 2010. And with a lot of respect, Paraguay is not in the top 8 worldwide for many things, right? It's a small country, and so it's a huge source of pride. I think that's a great point. And the point about relevance, I mean, that's how I knew where Paraguay was, because of the 98 World Cup as a kid. And when I've traveled a lot and when I used to live in Paraguay, people say, "Where are you coming from?" I always remember if I went to like Mexico and said I'm from Paraguay, like, "Oh, Pepe Cardoso, oh, Chava Cabañas." It's like that's what they think about in Paraguay. No one says like a president's name, or even, unfortunately, not a musician, but we have amazing music as well in Paraguay, or actors or movies. No one remembers that. They just remember the football players. So it is this huge source of pride, and everybody knows that. Everybody, I think, feels that. And so that's why this was such an important moment. And I think also for the outside world looking in, you talked about picking up on the news that around the world the next day that Paraguay had qualified for the World Cup. But I think it was some of that passion of seeing people out in the streets for qualifying, that was what was picked up. Because if you take the example of England, which is a very passionate footballing nation, but let's be honest, even when they get to the finals of the Euros and in the World Cup semifinals and things, you get a lot of people, but you don't see half the population out on the streets in London. So I mean, I think that's why, and this is just for qualifying, right? So I think that's why it picked up on a lot of people picked up on it, but I understand totally why there were so many celebrations there, because it's a huge moment, and it's really something that the country prides itself on, is its football.
Absolutely. I think that, well, you gotta shout out Nadia Farid and Larissa Riquelme. They kind of been holding the flag for the last 16 years, but now comes in Ciso, Almiron, Gustavo Gomez, all those guys. They're taking their spots, girls. Sorry about that. For next in 26. But we have obviously one more game. It was the last one. It was against Peru, obviously in Lima, Peru side that had a really disastrous World Cup qualifying campaign. They ended up in ninth place overall. They had gone 36 years without qualifying. They made it in 2018, very close in 22, lost in the playoff against Australia, and at 26 they went completely down. And of course, they were just playing for pride on this one. They're really playing on pride overall in terms of how they are going to perform. And for Paraguay, they also had history to really go into because they have never beaten Peru in Lima in a World Cup qualifier. So obviously that was the main big thing in this one. And of course, this was it was a different lineup actually. Ralph, I want to go to you first because obviously in this game we saw a few changes. We had obviously suspensions with Almiron, Andres Cubas, and Junior Alonso picking up yellow cards, meaning that they can't play the next game. So in came the replacements of Agustin Sandes playing in that sort of left back position. We saw Damian Bobadilla come in for obviously Andres Cubas, and we saw Angel Romero come in that side to replace Almiron. But the big one, the one that we even talked about last week, and there was a big debate, and I'm glad that we actually, we're right about this. Orlando Gil making his debut. So before we get to the game overall and what we saw, you gotta be happy that we saw a sort of Orlando Gil making that debut because I think that's what you want, and I think that I'm glad that Alfaro did that. With a Paraguay team that had already qualified, that this game was mainly just to pick up points and to finish. Obviously, you want to win every game that you want, but it was essential sort of a formality. And now with the first game of preparation for the actual World Cup and to try out new players, I'm glad that Alfaro actually. I don't know if he listened to us. If he did, gracias Alfaro. And I'm sure a lot of people have said that in the last few weeks to you, but yeah, maybe he did listen to us and said, hey, maybe he deserves a chance, or maybe that public pressure was coming to him, or maybe just in himself he was thinking, you know what, Natito, you've done your thing for the games, the 11 that have had you in. Let's give Heel a chance to do it.
Yeah, it was I think the perfect time to give him the chance, because it it is a bit more than a friendly, even though essentially there was nothing on the line for either team. But remember, Paraguay hadn't won an away game, so in the qualifiers, that was actually the first one they managed to win. And so and for Gil, there was the pressure of, being thrown into Lima, a place where Paraguay don't often win. They'd never won in qualifiers, for example. And so it gave that, I think, that competitive edge that he wanted to see from his possibly new goalkeeper, or more likely just to get a feeling of will this be his number two? Because I think this really, unfortunately for the other two goalkeepers, this kind of suggests he's going to be my number two. And he will eventually be Paraguay #1, I'm sure, right? Gatito cannot go on forever. So I think it was a good moment to throw him in. What I did want to pick up on as well is you mentioned the change at left back. There was also a change at right back with Gustavo Velasquez playing instead of Cáceres. And I did feel that Paraguay were not as strong. So that was something to think about. I mean, in Velasquez's case, he's coming back from injury, and so it's maybe more difficult, but he struggled, and it was Cáceres who came on as a sub who ended up making the assist. And for Sanders as well, you just think you're not as strong, you're not as compact with him as with Alonso. So there were these changes to the lineup, the whole back line, and even with that, Hill was able to do really well with some very good saves.
Yeah, really good saves actually. But then of course there was one guy, Fede, that stole the hotline the headlines. And I'm actually happy for him too, because obviously, he scored the last Paraguay goal at home. Well, one of the last two, obviously Enciso scored the last one against Uruguay. And then but it was Matias Galarza scoring a ridiculous goal, actually. Really nice goal. Los tres dedos, as we say here, similar to what Diego Gomez did against Brazil last year. It came at a right time, honestly, for him. It really did. It came at a right time for him because obviously he had just made this move to River Plate, has been, criticized from a lot of people, I think unjustly, because I think, obviously it's always hard to make an adjustment from Talleres to River Plate and have that pressure. But, I think he kind of looked at some of the doubters at River Plate and saw that goal and like, okay, wait a minute, he can actually play. But happy for him, and hey, happy for him to score the famous goal to give Paraguay their first ever win in Lima in a World Cup qualifier.
Yeah, and he showed up at the right time, right? Because just like you guys were saying, and standing out Orlando Hill, I mean, at the time that we scored or we started building up that play, I mean, it was Orlando Hill just standing out in the match. I mean, stopping absolutely everything that Peru was trying to create in that second half. They were kind of going over us, but we did put Kaku in there. We put him a midfield that handle the ball a lot better. And I kind of like that, with Matias Galarza and Gustavo Alfaro mentioned it after the game, right? I did not see the best Galarza in Defensores de Chaco in the first game when he came in, but I saw the Galarza that I love in the national team in this second half against Peru, the aggressive one, the one that looks to go into the pitch, to go into the box, that tries to score. And he was all over the place, and that's the energy you want to see from the players that come in from the bench, like Brian Ojeda, who also came in really well. He was part of the play, right? That ended up in the build up for the goal. Juan Cáceres also. So you see the subs, you saw the players bring the right attitude, the right energy into a match that, just like you said, Roberto, maybe a 0-0 was okay for everyone, but Peru was kind of having us against the ropes, and you saw that it was a special moment for Matias, right? I mean, not just scoring with the national team, but also scoring in a place, just like you said, we don't usually win there. It's a really hard place for Paraguayans. So it felt like a magical moment, just part of what we were going through these last couple of days, also with the whole party. And you kind of felt it in the first half, right? I thought that he was going to go with much more changes he was gonna change it up a lot more, because I saw players that were really tired. Tony Sanabria was one of them. I thought that midfield, Diego Gomez was kind of struggling, Ramon Sosa also. So he really had to change it up, and thankfully he found the right pieces to change it in the second half. And that speaks well of the competition we also have in this squad, right? That, no matter what's going on in the game, we have the right coach to fix it, and we have the players that can make the difference. And I love that. In the second half, we saw what kind of football we can bring. And I love the goal, guys. I mean, the build-up, just touching the ball. I mean, this team can play. We're just not going to throw it up there and score headers. This team can play football. And that just shows you once more the potential of what we have.
We only scored 13 goals in the qualifiers, but I mean, most of them were pretty good goals, right? Just thinking back, we've already talked about the Chilenas and the Gomez, the Enciso goals. Now you got this Galasa one to the collection. I mean, we we have a very talented team that's very good going forward when they're given that license. And it was what Fede just said I wanted to pick up on about Galasa having that confidence to go into the box because he's good enough to do what he did. And it's interesting that if you watch that play again, he's actually in the box the whole time. Like, it's not like he makes a late run as you would expect a midfield to do. He's like waiting for that ball. He actually has to play himself back onside when the cross comes in, pulls it on his chest and scores. And it's a real fabulous goal that he scored, and just shows there's a lot to work with. The competition for places, before we were worried that Paraguay had lots of players on a similar level. Like, I remember in the Berizzo era, he called up so many players, and it was hard to really decide who's better than the other. But now we have this very good starting 11, but we have players on their level that can push them, like we were seeing with some of the subs that came in, especially in midfield. So there's good competition, healthy competition for places, because now we're going to start thinking about, okay, who are they going to be the exact, I don't know if the squads are 26 again or 23, but who's going to be that exact number that goes to the World Cup?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's the big one to really focus on, guys. Because now, obviously, they have qualified officially. They finished in sixth place, as you said, Ralph. They scored 14 goals overall, 10 conceded, 28 points. There was actually a four-way tie when you think about it, guys. A four-way tie with Brazil, Uruguay, and Colombia, and of course, just 1 point behind of Ecuador. It's crazy to see that Bolivia are in the seventh place. You know, a team that obviously we beat in at home, and then obviously got us snatched points away. You know, they'll be fighting for a spot. Venezuela, unfortunately, will not be going to the first ever World Cup, so they will be missing out. But yeah, it's been a fascinating ride, really, and you know, obviously, we got to talk about what we've enjoyed, really. Just, you know, what we've enjoyed, because obviously there have been a lot of players that have really taken their mind out, that have really stolen the hearts. You know, you can go back to obviously Antonio Sanabres Chilena, the performances from Almiron and Ciso, Cubas, Alderete, Gustavo Gomez, Diego Gomez. I mean, the list goes on, Gatito. I mean, there's a list that goes on, and this was something that Fede implements. I'm gonna have him go first, actually, since he mentioned it. Your favorite player of the World Cup qualifiers, or even a top three if you want to do that. What says you, Fede, for this entire process? Who has impressed you the most?
Yeah, we got to pick our MVP, guys, and it's not just for a game; it's for the whole qualifiers, and that's kind of the little game I wanted to do with you guys, because it's a hard one, and it's good that it's hard. It feels great that it's hard to just pick one. It means that a lot of these guys really stood out. I think there's one name that kind of stands out from the rest, especially in this last run of games in the midfield. So I'm not gonna go with the obvious one. I'm gonna go with Miguel Almiron. I thought that, you know, in a certain stretch, in a certain moment, that this team couldn't handle the ball that much, that we didn't have Diego Gomez available in that midfield, who I thought in particular was gonna be key to build football. I thought Miggy really carried this team. I mean, he was really the player that was just going in the midfield and picking up the ball and taking this team forward. He was the player that really had the chemistry with Julio and Ciso, and that's something that a year ago I did not think it was going to be possible, and they came together, and I think, you know, for him it was also a full circle moment, like we said with other players, like Gustavo Gomez, like our goalkeeper Fernandez, like Junior Alonso. They've been there for so long. So I was gonna pick one of the experienced ones, and obviously our captain had its moments. Junior also scored once, but for me it was Almiron in a certain stretch, because it wasn't just one or two games. It was a stretch of games where he really became the leader of this team in the pitch. I don't know if he was in the locker room. I don't know if he was saying much, but in the pitch, he really took over in certain games, and I love that from him. And I wanted to see that Almiron in the qualifiers. I didn't see him maybe in these last couple of games. I remember what you guys said before this combo, that he's been playing too much for Atlanta. Maybe he's a bit tired. I kind of saw that from him in these two matches against Ecuador and Peru. But in a certain stretch, for me, he was really one of the most important players in this qualifiers.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Fede. I think Almiron and Mickey obviously has been through a lot in these last few processes, and you know, it was nice to see him get actually the Franco ABC when they did qualify, because he kind of has been sort of the face of this team, of this country, for the last couple of years, ever since moving to Atlanta United, basically, and then obviously doing his stuff at Newcastle. So you know, he deserves the respect, and yeah, he definitely is up there. Ralph, what says you? Are you gonna go on the Miggy bandwagon, or are you thinking about someone else that's kind of been your MVP in this whole process?
Well, for Miggy, one thing that's really interesting is how he's adapted as a player. Because we always thought of him as the player that scored goals, right? And I think now what you're seeing is more of his qualities as a leader, the way he tracks back, the way he works on the pitch. And so it's interesting, right? I don't know how many goals, assists he even got in the qualifiers, but that wasn't the point. That's not his role anymore. Because you got Enciso, you got Diego Gomez doing that, covering from midfield. But the midfielder that I'm actually going to pick, my number one player, was maybe the smallest guy on the field, but Andres Cubas. I just thought Cubas was so impressive. What I really liked about him was what he did in the Copa America when Paraguay was so bad. He was still standing out. Even when the team were doing badly, he was looking good. But overall, I think he ended up with over 100 duels won. He had like the most interceptions of any player, any Paraguayan player. He was epitomizing that old kind of Garra Guarani, even though he doesn't speak Guarani. So he comes into the team, just found his place, and he kind of just like I like the way he just goes about his business without much show, right? He just goes in there, does his job, cleans up, and then gets the ball to the other players further up the pitch that can do something. It's kind of a very thankless task sometimes as a player. He doesn't get much credit. You know, he doesn't get goals, he doesn't get assists. But I just thought Cubas did so well protecting his defense, becoming that he was like he was the kind of missing link in some of the other processes when Paraguay found themselves caught on counterattacks very easily, when they couldn't afford to attack much because they didn't have a way to kind of stop teams coming at them. He's like been that plug, that anchor, I suppose, that they needed to try and stop that. So I'm picking Andres Cubas because he was such a key part to that process.
Interesting. Yeah, Kuwas, I think, is in that top three for me. I think he's been important. It's funny, you guys have actually mentioned what I would pick as my top three. But it's none of the two that are gonna be in my first one. So I think we're all different, gonna all differentiate, which is a good thing because it shows that this Paraguay squad hasn't obviously had one superstar that just led everything else. You know, the fact that we can all point out to so many good players that they can put in their MVPs. I think I saw a tweet or something from like a radio station that they all had different options for their top three, which I thought was incredible because it shows how good this side is, you know, from Alderete, from Gatito, from Mickey, from Cuas, from Diego Gomez, from so many different players. I think they all had a part to contribute. But my number one, and you know, obviously I'll go into it's funny that you go into order. So Fede, you picked Almiron, he would be my third place option. Ralph, you picked Cuas, he'd be my second place option, but my first place option is the guy that unfortunately wasn't able to play in these last two games, but I think was important in the games that he was in. Julio Enciso, the La Joya, the Joy. I think his importance in the you know it was unfortunate that he didn't play in any of the games under Alfaro. Sorry, under Gustavo Varos, Guillermo Varoskelotto and Daniel Gallero. Maybe Paraguay would be in a different situation. Who knows? But when he came in under Alfaro, boom, he switched it up, and I think that was important that you become the important player in the big moments, and I think he did the goals against Bolivia, the goals against Colombia, the goals against Uruguay, those vital goals that you need. Because ultimately, when it when Ralph has said that, you know, those sort of difference makers of someone that has like just general raw talent. And Ciso is that guy, and you know, it's certainly someone that can be a bit polarizing depending on how you feel about Ciso as a whole. But you can't deny the talent that he has, and obviously now that he's made this move to Strasbourg officially. We have to wait and see what he can do in Liga. Maybe he does it at Chelsea after the World Cup, but his performances have been extraordinary. I've been very impressed. Had fortunate enough to see him in person. I remember even back at the Olympics when he was just killing it over there in France, and now you know him doing it at the World Cup qualifier. I think that shows that you can be the difference maker. And him at just being 21, he'll be 22 for the World Cup. We still have a lot to go ahead, and I think his sort of importance of being someone that is the difference maker because I think that's ultimately what you need. You know, all the great teams, you know, have that sort of difference makers, those X factors that, you know, you have the players doing the hard work, the 10 different players, whatever it may be. But the one guy that can win you games, that can give you that moment of brilliance, you know. I'm not here to make comparisons, obviously, but like when you have someone in Argentina with like a Messi, or when you have someone in Spain like Lamine Yamal or Cristiano Ronaldo at Portugal, or you know France and Mbappe, like those big guys, those you know big personalities that can change the game. I think Enciso fits that in Paraguay's team, and he's going to be a big important factor for this World Cup. So yeah, I think it's awesome that all three of us have different options. I think it's, whatever it may be, you could switch up as whatever, but I think um, you can't deny the importance, and we have to really feel happy about this team overall. But there's still a lot of things to go. It's not just, oh, we're just gonna sit back, we're just gonna chill and wait until June and wait for the draw on December 5th. No, no, no. We have a lot to prep for because, of course, Paraguay have some friendlies to play for, and I'll go to Fede on this one. In the case of we have some friendlies in October. Just in a couple of weeks. We're coming off a high of celebrating, but now the serious part works of focusing for the World Cup because now, like we said, even in the game against Peru, these are audition games now for a lot of these guys. I think you can really put in some players that are official locks for sure, unless something bad happens. But for a lot of guys, they are really fighting for their spots. And what better way to have some good test against, two teams in Asia? That's the first games, and we'll go month by month. We'll talk about the November games in a bit. But in October, Paraguay will travel to the Far East. They're going to Asia. They're going to take on Japan and South Korea, two teams that have obviously qualified for the World Cup, who have been to World Cups beforehand. And, honestly, Fed, I think these are great tests. I think when it comes to a country that wants to really stack itself with the world, again, yes, it's always hard. It's not easy to really get friendlies when, the Europeans are playing qualifiers or Nations League or whatnot. So, when you look at how Asian football has really grown, and Japan and South Korea have obviously been the sort of standout teams for the AFC in this sort of last, I don't know, couple decades now, basically. I think these are good tests. Japan and South Korea, obviously, they actually played the United States and Mexico in these friendlies this month. Japan didn't get the result that they did against the United States, but they tied Mexico. South Korea obviously beat the United States as well. I think they tied Mexico, if I'm not mistaken. So obviously, this is also a foreshadowing of what we'll talk about in November, but I think these are great tests. I think for Alfaro, and I think for a lot of these players, I think even for us as fans, that we get these tests because these are two teams that obviously are going to be very competitive at this World Cup coming up. And yeah, they're not easy games, so we have to obviously come with that mentality that, it's not going to be a walkover. It's not going to be a walk in the park, basically.
No, not at all. And it's not going to be an easy trip either, right? Go to the other side of the world and play against these two very good teams. Japan is one of my favorite teams in the World Cups lately. They're always competing. They've done really well against big teams also. So they got my respect. I think they're a really good test as of right now to see where we stand. But I think, Alfaro is going to go into testing mode. I think he's going to go into these upcoming friendlies. That's why he wants to stack up friendlies. That's why he wants as many games as possible, right? Just to see other players that he hasn't been able to give them time because we were competing for the World Cup qualifiers. As of right now, it's a different stage. You already got the base of players, and now you just got to start looking for your plan B, your plan C. See if you would miss a player because he's injured or something, and you need to play a different game, a different style in certain games. Maybe that's what we're gonna look into. I don't think we're gonna go into these friendlies with the best starting 11 and just repeat a team. I think we're going to go into these matches testing out players and see who can go through these filters, Ralph, to make it to the next World Cup. I think these are the games where players are going to play for their spot.
Yeah, that's right. We started to see it in the qualifiers, these last two games, playing with Ronaldo Martinez and having like the two up front, instead of the more traditional 4-3-3 that he'd been playing before. So definitely, I think we're going to see some changes in players, but also we're going to start seeing these different formations because one thing Alfaro really needs to figure out will be the group stage. I mean, I know again we're ahead of ourselves, but just looking at the possible pots and the games, he's really going to have to probably take the game to two teams. He can afford maybe to lose one against the first seed, but he's going to have two games where he really has to take the game to them. Whereas what we've been doing so far is we've been taking the game to one team, not to the next, because we've been doing home, playing one style, away another. We can't do that in the World Cup. So that's going to be, I think, key to start to think how he can mix it up and maybe do something different. But it will be really interesting for me. October, let's hope Enciso is fully fit by then. And so we get to see a bit of him. But also, I think this could be a time for some of those players that he called up almost surprisingly, right? This time. So Alcaraz didn't get any time. Romero, we didn't talk about Lucas Romero that got called up from Recoleta. That was a big surprise, but he couldn't really afford to play them in a World Cup qualifier. Now maybe he'll start to see that, and we'll maybe try and understand why did he call up these players in particular? What did they have that he's seeing, or what kind of system is he trying to implement that he thinks he'll be able to do? So it'll be interesting to see how Paraguay line up in terms of formation, but also in terms of personnel.
Yeah, obviously looking at sort of the, I passed it here to you guys in the group chat. Actually, both South Korea and Japan, the way that, things go right now, and it's a good point that you mentioned it, of course, Ralph. They are pot two teams, which, are always the big one to focus on. Everyone wants to focus on the pot one teams, which, we'll get to that in a bit. But I think it's actually really bold for Paraguay to do this because obviously, getting to competitive teams like Japan and South Korea, we'll obviously have to wait and see. Hey, you know what, Fed? I mean, what a story that would be for someone like Lucas Romero from Recoleta going all the way to the Far East and having his debut against those top teams. I mean, that would be not surprising, of course, because obviously Alfaro likes to do those kind of things. But hey, you know what? If you want to be a wild card, if you want to be someone that wants to win sort of the hearts of the fans, it's in these games. Obviously we're getting away to ahead of ourselves because we obviously don't know who we're going to be in the squads, but I'm sure, someone like Lucas Romero, who obviously didn't play in this process, but I'm sure like a lot of these guys who have been part of this whole, I think it's like 40 something odd players that Alfaro had called up in the whole 12 games. But all of these guys are looking in that chance and thinking like, hey, I need to impress myself now. Not now that it's obviously eased off a bit because they've already qualified. So the friendlies, yes, are very important. You want to demonstrate how good you are as a team and how competitive you can be. But I'm sure on the player perspective, it's also, like I said, it's an audition for them to really say, hey, I want to be on that 26-man squad or whatever the number will be. We don't know yet, but I want to be part of that final squad for the World Cup because I've demonstrated in this way. And, it could be at the expense of a player that maybe plays in a bigger team or maybe plays in a better league or whatever. But it shows that, hey, everyone has a chance. It's just they need to go show it, Fede.
Yeah, totally. Especially for these guys that came into this team for these games, for these last ones, just like Ralph mentioned. I mean, Lucas Romero was one of them. Adrian Alcaraz. We can also mention Alexis Duarte, and out of the ones that came in, it was Brian Ojeda, right? The one that had the opportunity to go in the game after not being able to play for this national team for a while. So he was called up, and that's just pure motivation for these guys going forward, right? I mean, they're gonna go back to their clubs thinking, okay, the coach finally called me up. Now he's gonna be on top of me, and now I got to do my thing. So I think we're starting that race, for the spot, and just what they do day by day is gonna be key. The way that they move in their clubs, I think they're gonna be following that also. That's why Damian Bobadilla was probably a starter in the game against Peru because of what he's doing at club level. So he definitely that comes into consideration going into the World Cup and seeing which players can make it into the final list. As of right now, I think there are several spots open, especially because of some injuries. The Matias Villasanti one opens a spot totally in midfield, and it might not be the only one because we're seeing a lot of strikers go cold. We saw it with Isidro Pita, who is out injured. We're seeing it with Alex Arce, who is not being able to score. Now he tried out Ronaldo Martinez, so we'll see if another forward comes into the rotation or has an opportunity because these last two games he really surprised by calling up Ronaldo Martinez.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it shows that, hey, every player has a chance. It's up to you to take it. In November, we have other friendlies. This was officially announced actually during the weekend when Paraguay had qualified. They will be playing, hey, a country that I'm, of course, familiar of. Ralph, you're familiar of. And Fede, of course, you're familiar of. The United States, one of the host countries. They will get a chance to play them in November in Chester, Pennsylvania, which is about a couple of miles from Philadelphia. It's the home of the Philadelphia Union, the MLS team. So Paraguay will get their first test in November against the United States. And it looks like it's not official, but I think Robert Harrison also spoke about it, that Mexico will be their next rival after that in Texas, I believe, or, certainly. So it shows that Paraguay will get the chance to play already on American soil before their chance to see the draw, which happens a couple of weeks beforehand. But Ralph, I mean, those are not. It's funny that you mentioned that. You look at the pots and it's obviously it's kind of straightforward, but hey, Paraguay will play 2 teams in pot 1, and then we're gonna play 2 teams in pot 2. So hey, maybe there was some genius in that, but hey, two tests against two good teams, obviously of the continent, obviously powerhouses in their own right. Obviously, you have what you can take about your sort of inconsistency. Obviously, the U.S. have been sort of a bit inconsistent with Mauricio Pochettino, but they're still obviously a good team with some good players. Mexico, the reigning Gold Cup champions with Javier Aguirre, obviously a very familiar opponent for Paraguay, as we both have been able to see games between them. We got the win, of course, back in 2022. I think it was the last time that they played Mexico, actually. But history, we know it all. We've seen them in friendlies in Copa America, as obviously the United States. We played them in so many games as well. So yeah, I think these are really good tests for Paraguay, again, similar to Japan and South Korea, for Paraguay to really get themselves ready for the World Cup.
Yeah, I think it's a good test, but this is a different idea from Alfaro, and well done for Harrison for doing this. Is getting to the US before the World Cup, like you said. Obviously, they're not going to use the World Cup stadiums for friendlies, but what they're going to be able to do is start thinking about training bases and checking out what they're going to be doing. So I think this was very smart in that kind of respect to come to the US to play these 2 friendlies, knowing that they can actually use that time constructively, not just for what's going on the pitch, but afterwards. They're going to travel from East Coast to Texas. I mean, it's not 100% confirmed Texas, but because it's Mexico, it's probably going to be the other side of the country. So they're already testing out some of that logistics, which they saw a bit of in the Copa America, but it is going to be much different for the World Cup. They could get thrown around much more. I was looking at the way the groups are. So I think there's a lot going into these 2 games as well, not just opposition on the field. But like you say, they get a couple of games against pot 1 opposition, and also the game against USA is good because it's almost an away game, right? So then they start to see some of that. What's going to happen when we're not what's the word, when we're not like the home team, or it's not really a neutral venue, because that could happen in a few games, I think, at this World Cup, just based on Paraguay's population compared to who they might end up playing. So all around, probably a good idea.
Are you saying, Fede, that you don't trust the Paraguayan locals, the diaspora here, being the localistas in this game? We are a small community, but we are still based in the Northeast, and there's a huge amount. I've been speaking to people in this area that are going to go to that game. It's obviously anytime Paraguay want to go and play nearby, they're going to go. Ralph, you've seen it in games, of course. Paraguayans love to travel, not a lot, but they want to show out. No, I don't know if that away factor will be a factor. Maybe against Mexico, yes, of course. But maybe the U.S. might be a bit, I don't know. That's my personal feeling. But, you know, fan support aside, and, they're going to get that obviously in Japan and South Korea too, who are very passionate fan bases that we know. You still got to really recognize that, the logistics, the sort of thinking ahead, sort of thing is good. I think this is really positive for Paraguay to do. The U.S., I think they play Uruguay as well in this group. So they're obviously getting South American opposition. I think they play Ecuador next month as well. And yeah, it kind of feels like connecting the dots really is that sort of South American, Asian, North American partnership in a way. Maybe we could,
Yeah,
who knows?
yeah, I just hope they're not too friendly. Hopefully they are competitive games, right? And we're not talking about 6 subs and players going soft or anything like that, because you can kind of get those games also. Hopefully we do go in there to compete, and we have that going, like I said before, for the spots and players trying to stand out. And for Paraguayan fans, it's going to be, also the first opportunity to have them there already in the United States playing really close to what the World Cup, having that first taste, that first opportunity. And it's definitely going to be an experience for a couple of players. We have a lot of players that are playing actually in the MLS. They might actually be called up for these kind of games just because they're not going to have to travel that much. I'm kind of thinking in that sense also, it could be an opportunity to see a lot more players that are based over there in the Northern Hemisphere. So we'll see. We'll see what kind of players Alfaro really wants to bring in, because I'm thinking out of the top of my head, there's a whole bunch of players in the MLS that could have a chance.
Yeah, we just mentioned the chat players like Alex Farina, players like Gileto Flores, Christian Paredes, who's over there at Portland, Matias Rojas, who just made that move as well from River Plate to Portland. Obviously, the ones that we have been accustomed to with Cubas, Almiron, Carlos Coronel. again, I feel like it is really tinkering time for a lot of these guys. And if they get a chance to play in these games, hey, so be it. I think that's certainly what we need to treat it at. Of course, they are friendlies at the end. I love that they always said we shouldn't be too friendly. Hey, I have a divided heart, as you know, American born, obviously raised with Paraguayan parents. But hey, I still want to see the best out of my teams as well. And then going from there, in March, obviously we have the draw in December. It was interesting seeing Harrison speak on the day of the Peru game where he was in talks. And I kind of want to play a little game for you guys, actually, that he did mention that he was really wanting to get a big European team, which of course would make sense because obviously the qualifiers would be done. The only teams that will be playing in the World Cup qualifiers would be the teams in the playoffs, which, I don't know if you've been able to see sort of the qualifiers as of yet, but there are some big powerhouses that might be in there as well. But that doesn't mean that other teams won't be there. So might be them, an African team as well. They're in, they'll be done by then. I think some of them will be in the Interconfederation playoff. So I'll go to Ralph actually first. If we do have these friendlies against, let's say, an African team and a European team, obviously you can't obviously pick a team that will be in the draw because that wouldn't make any sense. But if you were to pick a team that you would like Paraguay to take on, be it in Europe and Africa, what would you say? What would be your two?
I hadn't really thought
Unless
about
you want to say England, unless you want to say England, and maybe if England don't even get that draw against them, hey, why not?
Yeah, I remember they played England. I think they lost 4-0. This is way back when.
2002. It was 2002. I was looking
2002, there we go.
at
I mean,
entry.
I think I'd like to see them against the France. I remember the 3-3 draw when Victor Hennes was coach. I think that would be quite an interesting game to see how do they deal with some of that speed. They found it hard in the Olympics, remember? So they had that game in the Olympics against France or the warm up. So that would be cool to see. And then from Africa, I don't know. I mean, I remember them playing Ivory Coast, also warm up to 2006, or was that 2010?
2010, I think it was 2010.
All right,
Yes.
let's play Ivory Coast then because it's a good luck charm. That's what
There
I
you
want.
go. There you go. So you have France and Ivory Coast. So you got that
Yeah.
sort of, French connection. Fede, what do you say?
As for African teams, I don't know if there's one that really stands out for me. I mean, we don't have that much history with a lot of those teams. Maybe play South Africa, maybe because it has to do with the last World Cup. It
Well,
could be
you want
kind
to
of
get some.
special.
You want to get some luck in there. That psychological sort of thing. That
Yeah, yeah, that
yeah,
nostalgic kind of is a part
there
of
you
it.
go.
Just like because Ralph mentioned France and because he's wearing that jersey from back in the days. Um, and as European teams, there's a lot of them that are really strong that could really be a nice test for us. I like Italy as of right now.
If they make it, they
Belgium.
might go to the playoff. They might go to that playoff though. If you
Yeah, they're struggling, but they're always a strong team. Belgium, I want to see something like that because the powerhouses. I want to wait for them, for the World Cup because I do think we're gonna get one of them. We might get France, we might get Spain, we might get Portugal. We might get
England.
something like England. So we're gonna definitely go up against one of those teams eventually in the World Cup. So I'm gonna wait for the draw. I'm gonna go more for one of those teams. I would love to see Italy maybe again because they weren't there in the last World Cup, so it was really a weird one for me not having Italy in the last World Cup. Maybe they can make it this time around, and we're playing a friendly against them in March. But we got a long way to go until March, Roberto. A lot of things can happen, especially with that draw, right? I think that's going to clear it all up for those friendlies in particular.
Yeah, no, totally. Now, if I had to pick, I think for the Europeans, there's a lot good ones. You know what? I'm gonna say Croatia. I feel like we haven't played. I don't think we've ever played Croatia, or, I mean, or maybe we haven't in the past. But I'd like to see Croatia. I think they're a really talented team. Yes, they're still obviously aging, but they've always been sort of those teams that are built for tournament football. They were obviously second place in 2018, third place in 22. But I think Croatia would be a good test. If I had to pick, I know people will say Spain or Portugal or England. Would love one of those, but maybe we get one of them, so we have to find it on par. But I would like a Croatia. I think Croatia would be a really nice test. And for an African team, I mean, you did mention South Africa, you mentioned Ivory Coast. I don't even know if they're gonna make it. Um, I'll say I'll say Egypt. I'll say Egypt. Why not? Yeah, Mo Salah against Omar Lerete. Why not? We'll probably see them in the Premier League soon when Liverpool plays Sunderland. But I'd like Egypt, and I think they will be in the same pot anyway, so it wouldn't make any sense. to do that. But yeah, I'd like, and I'm just looking at the sort of the pots right now. So some of the if the draw ended right now, actually the European teams, the only European team actually that would be in that pot would be Norway. So again, maybe we get a chance against Norway in one of those friendlies. You know, it could probably make more sense because obviously the options are easier. And hey, we get to play Erling Haaland, Odegaard, and all those guys. Maybe a Sweden or something. You know, those are obviously one of those tough teams. So yeah, I'll say Croatia or Norway, I guess, and I guess an African team would be yeah, in Egypt or Algeria, I guess, if you want to go in that. So sort of those like power, and I would like that. You know, if obviously South Korea, Japan, USA, Mexico, they're good friendlies. I like that, and I think whatever happens in the draw, what it should be. And you're right, Fede. You know, just to close it out here, you want to take on the best teams and go well really on that one. So, but of course, no team is perfect. But I do wanted to finish off, I guess, on what to improve on because obviously, like every good team in the world, there obviously no one is perfect. But I guess moving forward, what are some of the things that maybe you didn't like, you know, in this process that can be obviously improved on heading into these friendlies, these warm-up games, and obviously heading into the World Cup. What would you like to see Paraguay do better heading into these games? And what you feel it's like, oh man, I really wish this team can do this or do that. What are you looking forward to, I guess, that Paraguay should fix for these games coming up?
I think it's just carrying on this mentality of being hungry into the World Cup. I don't want this team to get relaxed. You know, I want this team to play the World Cup just like they played the qualifiers here at home, just trying to win the respect over against the big teams also, and not being afraid to play against the big teams and not respect them. I don't want to go to the World Cup to speculate. I don't want to go to the World Cup to defend the whole game. I don't want that mentality. I don't want that. I don't want to see that from Paraguay. I want to see an attacking team. I want to see a team that has their identity, and I think Alfaro is going to go and try to build a team like that because this could be his last World Cup also, right? And I think he's going to try to have that long shot. And I've heard a couple of players also, we're going to aim to have a better World Cup than they did in 2010. That's what they're going to aim for, you know? They're going to aim for more games, and for that, you're going to have to have not just a good starting 11, you're going to have alternatives also. So for me, it's more about finding the right subs. It's about finding other players that can make the difference and not just depending on the starters. Because I think, you know, for the long run, for the long World Cup, you're going to need a lot of players, not just the starting 11.
There's a lot of factors coming into this, Ralph. Obviously, it's a longer World Cup, more games, it's a round of 32, actually. It factors in that Paraguay that, hey, out of the 48 teams, you know, you have 32 that go in. So that means 16 miss out because you have the best two from 12 groups, 24, and then obviously the best teams from the best eight, third place team. So Paraguay have to be really bad in a World Cup to, and you know, history says that they don't really have bad records. You know, I know we're getting too ahead of ourselves, but that is the truth. But hey, I mean, if Paraguay want to have another magical run, you know, round of 16, quarterfinals, whatever it may be, what do you want to see from this Paraguay side that you feel that they can have that opportunity to do it and to achieve what they can do at the World Cup?
Well, I think what they're missing, and so what I want to see in like the friendlies leading up to it is being able to kind of dominate games in terms of possession and finding goals. So they've been very good from scoring from set pieces. We know that. They've been good defensively. They've been good when they don't control possession, but they're still able to be very effective in terms of creating chances. So all of that's good, but I'm worried about what if you play. I'm gonna throw it out loud like Uzbekistan. Like, I how are you going to dominate that game and make sure you get the 3 points? And so this is my big question. We saw a little bit of it, by the way, that second half against Peru was an example where Paraguay were on top in terms of territory possession, and they made it count with the goal. But I just want to see a bit more of that. And I think the other thing is, yeah, who are going to be our backup players? Where are these like key backup players going to come in? Because there's going to be injuries. It's just it's impossible that there won't be injuries. Probably the way we play, if we do play a bit more defensive with less possession, there's going to be suspensions because when you have less of the ball, you commit more fouls. That's just kind of the logic of it. So I think those are the two things, like being able to dominate games or having that option, and then who is really going to be the second line of players that we can count on.
I agree. I think, you guys hit it on the nail for me as well. I think Paraguay really need to go into this World Cup and obviously in these friendlies, being the protagonist, being able to take this sort of effectiveness and not be fearful. I think the great Paraguay teams of the past have demonstrated la garra that they've always had, garra Guarani, and I think that made them so formidable or from the old days in 98 to 2010 to now. I mean that's sort of a lo Paraguay to play like that. And so I think there is that level of understanding that they need to improve on that end. And I think, yes, it'd be nice to have an effective goal scorer. Paraguay do not have an Erling Haaland. They do not have a Messi. They don't have those type of big players. But like I mentioned with Enciso and all the guys that we mentioned are MVPs and the other ones, they can form it as a team. And then when you have such a good motivator and a man manager and someone like Alfaro, who I'm sure he wants his World Cup revenge too. He was so close in 22 with Ecuador that he couldn't get out of the group stage. I think this is sort of his personal revenge as well, that he wants to, if it is his last World Cup, if it's last job or whatever, that he wants to go off on a high and wants to do that. And he said that, he said something that I think really it hit hard actually about when someone asked like how can they do in the World Cup? No one wants to go and say, hey, we're there to participate. They want to go in to go in and win it. And you see that even in some of the interviews. I was listening to an interview by Andres Cubas saying that, obviously his big dream is to win it, to win the World Cup. And that's certainly something that is a pipe dream for a lot, but I think in their mind that they want to do that. And I think a lot of the 47 teams also felt that as well. But that is it. And it starts now. I think this whole process is now building up to the actual moment, the one where we showcase ourselves and basically conquer the world. One wants to dream, but one wants to dream to win that World Cup. So, obviously we're gonna obviously talk about as we always do here on Guarani Vision, as we've done for the last 5 years. It's gonna be a big couple of months. We obviously have youth tournaments coming up too, because we got the U20 World Cup, we got the U17 World Cup, the women's U17 World Cup as well. Got to keep an eye on that. Obviously, we have a big clausura to finish. We don't have a champion as of yet, so we'll talk about that. And yeah, it's been a fascinating year of 25. I'm happy that we were able to do this, obviously, to celebrate in this occasion as well as we close out another great episode of Guarani Vision, the first one as World Cup finalists in a World Cup in 26. For myself, Roberto Rojas, Fede Perez, and Ralph Hannah, thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.